And the colors, I liked sort of bringing in that's another subtext, the sense of rasas and colors that come from. There's also a practice of the Buddha families and understanding the qualities, psychological qualities of colors, and then the colors out of Rimbaud's Voyelle and the colors of, I don't know, mixing colors, sort of shadings.
Yeah, this is an area where, like the rasas, you know, like it gets represented in music, in artworks, in food, and in all kinds of modes of, you know, being. And the notion is that all of these get embodied and played out, all the rasas. So, like, you know, we have anger management here in our culture, whereas with the rasas, it's like anger is something that you unite with and you become, you practice in the way that you would practice compassion.
And that's part of, you know, Buddhist practice. You go into these states of kind of passionate or heightened awareness, and then you have to break it down. You don't hold on, or you go a little bit mad. But rasa the term is Sanskrit and actually means something like flavor. So it's like the flavor of these states of mind.
Yeah. Would you talk a bit about this kind of complex subtitle, Colors and the Mechanism of Concealment, which is an elusive concept that's you know, amended to the Iovis Trilogy. You know, it becomes called that too.
And there's a section in book 3 called that. I think it has to do with the sense of living in this bifurcated world that we're in, and what's seen and what's unseen, and what is concealed within ourselves, and what's concealed from us, and what those colors are like, and kind of reclaiming them in a way. I mean, it's a dark sort of view. They're, you know, if you just close your eyes and think, what are the colors of the times that we're in? What are we seeing?
Yeah, what Stan Brakhage called closed-eye vision.
Closed-eye vision, and the notion. I mean, I've been working with this idea. It's in one of Agaman's more recent books. I think it's in Nudities. This idea of how are you contemporary with your time? And he talks about looking into the darkness, and that the poet and artist should be, you know, looking in that way, and that there's so much light in that darkness. But he talks about off-cell vision, which is something Stan goes on about, and the way that we actually have this we see in the darkness.
Yeah.
So there's something about that, and there are colors. So what are the colors you see in that darkness? And then the mechanism is, I mean, there are mechanisms within the structure of the poem, and this kind of building the machine and so on, and the tripartite structure. And then there's the whole mechanisms of these wars, and that takes us back to this color wheel in Buddhism and the warring God realm, which is a self-perpetuating view of having to really create an enemy, you know, to survive and get that juice, to get juiced up like Zeus. And so there's a pun on that D-J-E-U-S, which is the root of Zeus, and then the juice and the generative of, you know, the deeds and the seeds of this patriarch that's constantly fucking with everything, and, you know, so that looking at the war machine as well, and so that's part of the
the concealment.
The concealment, yeah.
Yeah, because it's constantly called something else, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
there's
constantly
so many
liberty, or, you know, democracy, or, you know, freedom. They hate us for our freedom.
Yeah.
You know, was that great line. I have a friend who's this Palestinian guy who was making coffee in the coffee shop where he works, and, you know, I asked him one day, "How are you, Nabil?" And he said, "Oh man, I'm up to here in Mochas. They hate us for our way of life." He was riffing on the George Bush.
Yeah.
You know.
It was interesting looking at the beginning, just realizing that there's one letter to Bush Senior in there. I was trying to remember who was president, you know, 25 years ago. It all comes back too readily.
Yeah, how does it feel to be finished?
A relief. I'm going to write about love. It was a little bit hard at the end. It was a moment where I had to go out and take a walk and just start to end it. And so I went up. I was in Colorado and went up into the foothills, and there was this sort of encounter with a rattlesnake. It was doing its little dance, and I started chanting the good friend of some of us, close friend of Joanne and others, Peter Warshaw. He suggested a way that you talk to the animals. I was always getting scolded for the way I talked to the animals. I remember Philip Willing saying, "Don't talk to the chickens like that, Anne." But Peter Warshaw suggested you go shh, 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 or shh, 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 shh. So I started doing that, and actually we got in sync. And so on. There were a couple of other people on the path. It was getting sort of dusk, and then this Brunhilde was coming up the path with a huge rock in her hand. She said, "I've come to kill the snake." And I need to do a better account. It's not really recounted properly in the book. But and then I said, no, you can't do that. You know, this is an avatar that's come to, tell us about the twilight. And I had to. Somebody had passed her on the road saying, "Don't go up that road. There's a snake up that road." So anyway, it became this very operatic scene. And that was it. And the notion also of being able to end in the last line is in a still wild place. And suggesting something else.
And you're back in Delos too with Apollo and the
yes.
snake. Yeah.
There's lots of little. Have to be careful with this mythology stuff. What trouble? Mythos.
One of the things we proposed to talk about too was, since we've both been involved in, a formal work with archives, in the sense that, if people don't know, I mean, our archive.org houses a great deal of what went on at Naropa from the beginning, and these recordings have been digitized and they're available free online. So you can actually take a 15-week course on Buddhism with Philip Whalen, by attending to these tapes.
Just go to archive.org and then scroll down to
find Naropa. And there's an amazing body of work that was collected and documented and continues to be documented, and really unique. I mean, it's quite different from, say, the Poetry Center archives, where people come and read their work, and yes, we have their comments and the specificity of who they are with on stage and so on, but at the Naropa archive, you're often getting,
8 hours of William Burroughs talking about the Radave tapes with putting on tape recorders in empty rooms and
and like
getting the ghosts.
And Allen Ginsberg talking about Sappho and rattling through all his research, and it's fantastic to be there in that kind of real time in these teaching environments and such, and just be attentive to that. And here, as most of us know, the Poetry Center has been collecting and archived since 1954 of original recordings by writers and poets who have come through, and people from San Francisco, people from all over the world. And there's a challenge in terms of keep hanging on to this stuff, because it doesn't have a monetary value in the way that commodities do, but the value is something that's incredibly precious at the same time, and it becomes that in partaking in it, in taking it in, and in being there when you need it, And so I remember coming out here when I first lived in the Bay Area. I discovered there was an archive out here, and I came out, and so for the first time I heard the voices of John Wieners on tape, and other people that I could borrow on cassettes, and Philip Whalen, and just amazing stuff that I was, Denise Levertov, and so on. I remember bringing these tapes home and having them, and you folks live in a very different time now when you think everything is out there on the internet or something, but there was a time not so long ago when there would be a cassette tape holding that voice that existed, and you had it or you didn't have it. Maybe somebody could copy it if they had the equipment, but likely not, And so these are precious objects that either got lost, thrown away, or maintained by these archives. And now the challenge is, we have this superabundance of fantastic stuff. So what do we do with it? How do we take it in? Where is its value in this superabundance that we have now? I mean, we really do.
I think it's in the letters between Robert Duncan and Denise Levertov. At one point, probably it's Robert Creeley sending Duncan a tape, and I realized, people were sending around one copy of this tape to one another, would circulate. And it made me think of the importance of the orality of hearing the voice of the maker of the song, so to speak, and that has not been, I think, more deeply addressed, the sense of that at that, particularly at that time, the New American Poetry, and then also
could record.
Right, right. And then, the work, of course, that people like, Rothenberg has gathered in the ethnopoetic anthologies and field recordings and recordings of, Maria Sabina and so on, how important that is in a discourse around this historical period, and the preservation, understanding the implications of that, that this one kind of runic tape could circulate and affect other, response, and also people's own poetics, and what was gathered there.
So my question then is, how does that affect the poetics of the Iovis Trilogy? Because you talk at multiple junctures about archive and the archive and the risk to the archive, the war on the archive, the preservation of the archive.
Well, polyvocality, I think, that's sort of the montage and the polyvocalness and all the other voices in there, and then the conversations through the epistles and this kind of ongoing, also what's that tone? I sometimes think of it as being a kind of didactic tone and overbearing with this almost Cassandra-like, the prophetic, and we have to again let people know that this was just not that this wasn't the only version. I mean, we've all experienced the war on memory. This incredible war on our memory. We've all experienced these descriptions of these master narratives. We only have to look at the current discourse, political discourse, to see people are just constantly changing their stories every time. There's all this concealment that is then revealed. Things are quickly changing. Things are forgotten, and then to feel both the continuity that exists in these archives. I think continuity of thinking, and what I always found delightful in Europa was the conversation between gathering these folk together, and often was not scripted. They're talks and they're lectures and presentations of that kind, of panels and colloquia, so on. But there are also people responding right on the spot, and of course that was one of Alan's practices, composed on the tongue, spontaneous poetics, and being able to actually talk.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that the book does by bringing in a certain sense, the unedited speech of others. And
it opens with a recording in a taxi cab with red grooms, driving through our mutual neighborhood, where he's commenting. Of course, when I go back, all that's gone, all the references, maybe the puck building,
25 years.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
So that kind of, and of course I always love the Cody, the Cowlex Cody, the recorded parts in there, I think are amazing, and also a new way of capturing that, is suddenly becoming very available in this sense of archive fever. Do you know that book, the archive fever, and that archive is a kind of, again, this inscription, and it lets us know where we've been in all the rasas that we experience, and all these states of mind, and where we've been in time. So, seeing an archive as an arc of time, and this book is an arc of time, and anybody's book. I mean, we're all making these projects that are existing in a certain kind of time frame, and sometimes you can be more obsessive about it, dating by the solstice and the Perseid showers and trying to locate your own map, your celestial map, and also your map of Monday, your map of the world. And so the archive is a kind of map, the archive is a practice, the archive is, again, a way of, and then then there'll be people who say, there's just too much, everybody's photographing their child's little show in the second grade, and a friend of mine in Boulder was, I can't raise any money for the dance company here, that they only want to just photograph their children in dance, shows.
But then, that gets flipped around too, where, as we see just, really starting with the Egyptian and Tunisian situations, it's like suddenly there's news being produced by you and me,
Exactly.
and, 1,000 other people
Right.
who are able to broadcast that news quite widely. I mean, how many views could you see of the students being pepper sprayed at UC Davis
Yeah.
the other week?
Yeah.
And seeing the different views, you know, tells a different aspect of the story, and you probably see more than you would see if you were there, you know, and you would never, this would never have been available. There would have been a single image that would be repeated over and over. You know?
Well, that's, it's the whole practice of sousvalence too, you know, sousvalence as opposed to surveillance. So sous, you know, coming from within your own, you know, from below, from you, the documentarian. Everybody can have a little camera and cell phone, and, you know, when we were doing protests, it was during the Republican convention in New York, you know, everybody was wired, and it would, you know, there was some police action, and you get a call, don't go down that street, head over to, you know, this park, or so on. So it became also a sort of guide, what's the word for a, you know, guiding in terms of directions?
GPS.
Yeah, GPS, global positioning machine. We all can be our own, you know, global positioning machines. We can be going in these a number of directions. So I think some of the impulse for this book was also to go in many directions as I can, and have that be a sort of activity of this way to be also in the world and responding and acting.
It is a kind of world that's whirlwind in a Lakean sense almost, you know. You know, it is all blowing in. It's all available.
Yeah, well, we're very much still these receivers.
Well, in that sense, it's like a model of how to be receptive to our incredibly, you know, again, superabundant universe. You know, we're bombarded by images and sounds, and one of the standard modes of operation seems to be tuning out in whatever version, you know, however that is done.
I think it was Kenneth Burt, who I studied with a little bit in college. He was just a visiting lecturer, but I remember he talks about Patterson as a kind of Baedeker, you know, a guidebook, but it, you know, the terms have changed.
As another kind of epic. I mean, always
right,
Lunar
Baedeker, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are the, you know, what is the form? You know, what is the form? And I say I'm the bride to my book.